I'm Sarah, and today we're going to Old Tucson Studios. This is slightly problematic, but we're getting better. With me, we've talked about tourism and intersectional theory, but how did I apply both of these into my research? I went to Old Tucson Studios and I asked a lot of people a lot of questions. Let's start with Old Tucson. It's currently closed due to COVID-19, but Old Tucson is a film studio turned theme park just outside of Tucson, Arizona. The structures were first built in 1939 for the Jean Arthur film Arizona. That's right, the first film made at Old Tucson was about a woman who owned her own cattle ranch, baked pies, and personally went after the guys who stole her cattle. Producers chose this site because of the landscape. They wanted vast, open, sweeping views. They wanted to build an entire town, and then they had to run a herd of cattle through that town. They also needed somewhere that was close to Hollywood and had predictable weather for outdoor filming. Arizona was nominated for 2 Oscars in 1940, and just for perspective, the year before, the 1939 Oscars were dominated by Stagecoach, The Wizard of Oz, and Gone with the Wind. Since then, Old Tucson has hosted over 400 projects, including film, TV, commercials, and music videos. It's an icon that has appeared in homes and theaters across America and the world for over 80 years. Old Tucson plays into this by effectively becoming a heritage site. Filmmakers and families have walked those streets for generations. In 2014, Old Tucson committed to becoming a multicultural, living history educational center by transferring their lease from the Old Tucson Company to the Arizona Sonora Western Heritage Foundation. They also formed partnerships with the University of Arizona and the Arizona Historical Society. The park reuses film and character names on their stores and restaurants, and many of their shows are interpretations of films previously created on property. And every year they host local events like the Western Heritage Festival, the Wild Wild West Steampunk Convention, and Nightfall, the annual Halloween haunt. Old Tucson grew with its audience and established their place in the community. Now, for those of us outside of the Sonoran Desert, after 80 years of seeing Old Tucson in our westerns, it's pretty embedded in our brains that the American Western is in the Southwest. 49 out of 50 people I interviewed said the Sonoran Desert with its saguaro cacti was a good place to set a Western. It beat out pictures of Wyoming, Alaska, and South Dakota because it is incredibly convenient to film in southern Arizona. The predictable weather and proximity to Hollywood made Old Tucson an ideal location, saguaros included. The interesting thing is that saguaros only grow in that one region of North America. The American West is so much bigger, but our collective visual is of this one small area. It gets weird when films say they are in one place, like Texas, and they show Arizona identifiable by the saguaro cactus. But why is the saguaro such a big deal? Here to explain is our first guest. Hi!
Skugdash Anya Piggy Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan Chapwalk Amachit Anya Wood PhD candidate Kitcha Ahanadam Kitcha Danatam Kukur Har Mashkumakur Mashkuma Dam. Good day, my name is Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan. I come from the Thanatam Nation, specifically the Santa Barbara District. I wear many different hats. Currently, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Arizona in American Indian Studies with a minor in journalism. I'm also a freelance journalist when I have the chance, and I'm also a full-time faculty at Thanatam Community College in the Thanatam Studies program.
Lovely to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
I think first to start off, I want to explain a little bit about what saguaros mean to my people. And so we have our stories that explain, how things became to be, our creation stories, why, things look the way they are, or, for example, how the snake became a rattlesnake in some cases, different things like that. And so for us, when it comes to saguaros, it was actually a human being that turned into a saguaro. And so for myself, I don't speak for the whole Thanatam Nation, but specifically where I grew up and my upbringing and my teachings, I look at the Saguaro as a human being. And the Saguaro provides plenty of different things for not only humans, but also animals. When it comes to our New Year is a season, which is in June and July. And a part of that is having a saguaro fruit harvest, where we pick the fruit off of the saguaros, also called the Bahidaj in Autumn, and we turn it into jam, syrup, and it's also made into a ceremonial wine. And so it's a big factor, in our history, our culture, our traditions. There's another part to all that. So you have this cultural side within my tribe, but then when you look at anything relating to Arizona, there's always a saguaro. And there's been times where I've seen things with the Grand Canyon and there's a saguaro, anything oriented with Arizona. And so, that's unique in a sense, because this is the only place where you can find saguaros. And it's kind of iconic, to have a saguaro in advertisements, tourism, films. I've taken literature classes where you have somebody writing about the desert. And I remember particularly in one class, they were talking about Arizona and talking about the Southwest, and they started talking about armadillos. We don't have armadillos here, and so it's like, you got to make sure you get, your facts correctly. To me, you always have to kind of see what is portrayed correctly, what kind of looks a little funny.
The next question is, what does the Sonoran landscape mean to you? Which I feel like we covered.
I can go a little bit more in depth if you'd like.
Yeah.
For the Tohono Nation, we were never removed from our homelands. And so we see this area as the heart of the world, the center of the world, our Atam Druid. So Atam means people, Druid means land. So the people's land. And for us, like I just mentioned, it's the center of the world for us. And, there's no other place like it. And a lot of time people don't think that the desert has a lot to offer. It's just hot and there's just dirt here. But there's so much abundance of animals, nutrients within the plants, and monsoon rains in the summertime. It's a beautiful place here. This is our homeland, and I think people need to recognize that and respect that and understand that when they get opportunities, they should acknowledge whose land that they are on. And so for anybody that comes to Tucson, realizing that they are on the ancestral lands of the Tohono.
Yeah, I think you also bridged into our next question as well. Thank you. How are saguaros adapted for their environment?
Saguaros are really fascinating, in my opinion, because of how long they live. And I guess the best way to put it, how they store, I was gonna say house water, because it essentially is like their house, where they're able to just thrive in the desert. They're living their best lives, in my opinion. And there was a recent article that did come out, though, that was addressing climate change. There were saguaros that bloomed out of season, because that usually starts taking place spring. Here we were in fall and they were sprouting flowers. And so scientists and we're kind of looking at that and saying, what's going on here? But again, for myself, looking and seeing, saguaros as people, as our ancestors, it kind of, to me, was interesting because of the pandemic right now and everything that we're experiencing. And then you have these group of saguaros that bloom out of season, and it's like everything's off, and the environment feels that. The environment knows that. The saguaros know that. But at the same time, though, we are resilient people. The saguaro is resilient, and I feel like, when things start to get better, so will the Saguaros. So I don't know if that makes sense with kind of looking at that, if it's a coincidence or how that kind of correlates. I thought that was interesting because I was interviewed for that, a Washington Post article about it. And it made me start to really think about things. But again, like I said, we're resilient.
The next question is, how would you like to see the Sonoran Desert portrayed in the future?
I think it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with accuracy, capturing the beauty that is here. They try to include mountain ranges that I guess the common person, if they're not from the area, wouldn't recognize. But then, for myself, I'm like, wait, that's not even like a mountain range that would be here in the Southwest. I'm like, and you can tell, like, I don't know how to explain that, but you can just tell, and you're like, that looks like Colorado, or that looks like, again, like New Mexico, or even, Northern California. And I'm like, that's totally not the Southwest. I feel like too many times I understand money is a factor, time and all those different things that go into making a film. But I mean, you got to do it right. So you need to, if you're doing that, you need a budget. You need to make sure that you're actually coming to the Southwest and you're actually doing your filming here, and getting all of those details that someone like myself who is from the area would recognize. Again, just going back to it, just being accurate and being able to come here and really capture the beauty and the essence of what makes the Sonoran Desert just an amazing place.
It sounds like what you say, representation matters, and it goes beyond just people. It definitely applies to place as well.
Yeah, and I think also too, just like those landmarks, not only the plants, the animals, but the mountain ranges as well, because when you're in Tucson, every single direction you look, you'll see a mountain range. And then on top of it, there's places within Tucson that have shown up in film. Yeah, that representation to just do it right, I guess, is the best way, because there's been so many times that I've seen in literature and films where it's supposedly supposed to, be the Sonoran Desert, and you're like, nope, that's Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Where can people go to learn more?
I think social media is a really good place to kind of find out information if you go to the right pages. Looking at the Saguaro National Park, also there's a desert museum is another good resource to give you information to learn specifically about Tohono Nation. My tribe, my people, we have a website that you can visit and learn more. Also, City of Tucson, is a good place to kind of start to, as somewhere to kind of starting place, and then branching off to kind of find more information. And unfortunately, Old Tucson Studios is a really great place for tourists to kind of check out and look at and see how old films were filmed, and kind of get that, I guess, Western feel here in the desert. But it closed, and because of the pandemic, and that it's just kind of disheartening to see those attractions and other small businesses and local businesses that have had to close because of the pandemic. So, I'm really interested to see what does end up happening with Old Tucson, if somebody buys it and reopens it, or if it's just gonna kind of sit there and, just collect dust and nothing ever comes of it again. Well, I guess time will tell.
It is an important piece of American culture, and they've come back before, so I think they can do it again.
Yeah, I'm hoping the same thing, because one of the main events that they would hold is Nightfall. So all of October, they would have, Halloween, attractions and different shows. And it was just, I've been going there like my whole life. And so that was always something to look forward to. I really am interested to see what happens and see what becomes of it, because I just really hope that I don't want it to get destroyed. I don't want it, anything like that to happen to it. I just really hope that, definitely have ties to Old Tucson. And like I said, I grew up watching Westerns. But that's all I have.
And we'll link everything you said in the description so everyone can check it out.
Cool.
Thanks, Jacelle. If you learned something from this episode, show your support for the Tohono O'odham Community College by giving them a donation or following them on Facebook. Links are in the description. If you want to continue the conversation with me or any of us at Slightly Problematic, you can find us online at slightlyproblematic.net or on social media using the handle at slightprob.net. Thanks, and we'll see you in Volume 2.